Guess who got brands talking? Brandlive.co.za.
Good morning, everyone. You have tuned into the WITEE Chatterbots show, Women in Tech Empowering Everyone. So we are coming live from our studios at 27 Boxes in the bohemian city of Melville. Now, I don't know if you guys recall, but a few weeks ago, I announced that we have a very, very exciting news for you. So we have changed the format of our show. We will not only be featuring interviews with industry heavyweights, but we will also have different co-hosts that will interview with me, who are also heavyweights in the topic of the day. We believe knowledge is your superpower, and our aim of the show is to empower our listeners with masterclasses and interviews on the latest trends in digital technology, innovation, entrepreneurship, but also give you perspective on socio-economic developments to propel your business forward. So drum roll! First, I would like to introduce you to my co-host of the day, the renowned Paul Berney from the UK, founder of The Connected Marketer. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Carmen, from the grey and rainy England. Yeah, sadly, that's what you expected me. I feel empowered being able to be involved in a show with women in technology.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Seriously, this is where we are going to trailblaze forward. But we do need the men by our side and to support us through this journey. So
happy to help.
Fantastic. And then the moment you've all been waiting for, our guest for today is Kirsty Dugmore, the founder of Suga and Spice, a strategic marketing and corporate training agency, and she considers herself as a marketing nerd, mom, wine enthusiast, and a lover of life with deep passion of learning. Good morning, Kirsty.
Morning, Carmen and Paul. Thanks for having me on the show.
Welcome. Well, for many of you don't know that you've studied psychology and marketing communication, so you come with a very different edge to the show.
Absolutely. I hope I certainly can give you a couple of new angles to tackle your marketing solutions or problems with.
Of course. Okay, well, today we are going to chat about behavioral economics and unpack everything from observed consumer behavior, cognitive neuroscience, and evidence-based marketing. It's quite a mouthful. I feel like I just have to make my cheeks go a little bit numb to say it all. But I'm going to hand you over to Paul. Paul, will you kick this off for us? Jump in.
Yeah, happy to. And so really delighted to be starting my kind of role as co-host by getting to talk to someone like Kirsty, because Carmen, that I've been a big advocate of this idea of the world now being made up of connected individuals.
Yes.
That kind of empower the way in which we as marketers have to think. And so, Kirsty, for you, the basic theory behind the connected individual is, at least in my mind, is that the more devices that we have in our lives, the more connections we have, the more we live in a kind of mental state of connectedness, i.e. constantly aware of our ability to connect with our digital selves. The more you live in that mental state of connectedness, the more it changes your behavior, which is why it's so important for marketers to understand behavior. Now, what fascinates me about your background is that you talk about your ability to understand individuals based around three quite different aspects of science. So observed consumer behavior, behavioral economics, and cognitive neuroscience. So for the layman like me, can you unpack those three things first of all and tell us what's the difference between those three things?
Yes, certainly. And let me just give the listeners a bit of background. So where all these disciplines come from is I have put together an evidence-based marketing course in terms of bringing science and the latest science and learnings from these disciplines into the marketing world. So essentially what I've done is use these three: observed consumer behavior, behavioral economics, and cognitive neuroscience to put an integrated course together for marketers. Certainly to give them some insight in how we are progressing globally with all this incredible information that we have at our fingertips and applying that to the marketing field. So let me just unpack all three of them for you. Observed consumer behavior is certainly the difference between normal research and observed consumer behavior is where companies are showing and taking how consumers are behaving and using that research. So it's actual behavior. The thought leaders in this space are the Ehrenberg Bass Institute of Marketing Science. They certainly have most of the major brands around the world on their books, and they're the biggest research house in marketing in the world. They have something like 56 marketing professors on their books. And
so this is Byron Sharp and people like that.
This is Mr. Byron Sharp, absolutely, and the How Brands Grow books. And they certainly have had a huge impact on marketing and unpacking a lot of or debunking a lot of the myths around commonly held beliefs in how marketing works. And how they've done that is through good old science-based research, by understanding how consumers behave and sort of putting that together through years and years across different countries, across different markets, and then they collate it and put it into usable marketing fundamentals that marketers can then use when putting marketing strategy or media plans together. So incredibly impressive people.
So how is that different then to behavioral economics?
So behavioral economics is a whole nother discipline, and behavioral economics is impacting a lot of fields, from how we teach to medicine. Certainly the economics fields are applying behavioral economics in their field, and it's now come full circle to obviously have some input in the marketing field. So behavioral economics is understanding how consumers make decisions, so how your brains work and how consumers are making decisions in their day-to-day life. There's some really incredibly smart people that are impacting this, certainly in the marketing space. Someone like a Dan Ariely, who has written Irrationally Rational Consumers, and there's a couple of guys. Lots of books, I can go on and on, but certainly what behavioral economics does for marketing is help us as marketers understand how consumers are behaving in the real world. It debunks a lot of the thinking that we sit and consider our decisions with a long thought process. We plan, we then consider, we then think about our decisions post-purchase. What behavioral economics says is that we have a lot of our brain is wired to shortcut, and it's for survival. We're incredibly clever and incredibly smart, but we're making snap decisions based on a variety of cognitive biases or heuristics. And once you understand these as a marketer, you're able to build and put together communication strategies and communication creative that works with how we behave, consumers, aka humans, are behaving in the marketplace, and are we working and giving ourselves the best practice in terms of applying what we know with how we know consumers are now behaving. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm going to come back to you and ask you some questions on that. And so finally, cognitive neuroscience. What is that? How is that different to the other two you just talked about?
So cognitive neuroscience is spearheaded obviously by technology and our ability to see what's going on in brain function specifically. And there's some really fancy shiny machines that marketing neuroscience people are able to use in terms of understanding how we are responding to marketing messages or advertising messages. Or how our brains are reacting when they're picking brands off the shelf, etc., etc. So what this is, it's the hardest science. Certainly, it's the fastest growing area of marketing, but it is obviously made possible by technology. So your big, very fancy fMRI machines that allow you to read people's brainwaves. There's companies that are doing skin sensors, they're monitoring the pupils and all those sorts of things. So it's very science-based, but it's giving marketers the opportunity to understand exactly what's happening at brain level when they are exposed to advertising messages.
Cool.
So our marketers here now they're getting a ton of help from what you've described here as real world observed behavior, scientific and evidence thing. Let's take it back to a really simple question then. How do we make decisions about the things that we are going to buy, about the brands that we're going to interact with?
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't consider them as much as marketers as we'd like to think that consumers are considering them. What I need to unpack the system 1 and system 2 very quickly for listeners. But what behavioral economics says is that there are 2 systems in your brain. System 1, which operates instinctively and very quickly and uses a lot of shortcuts. And then there's system 2, which is your logical thought through process. System 2 is incredibly lazy and we don't use it very often. In fact, most of the time, through most of the day, through most of our lives, we're on System 1 as humans or as consumers. And certainly from a marketing perspective, we need to understand that consumers are making snap decisions most of the time. So that's why brands become incredibly important, because when they're in the mood or the need to buy a certain product or a certain category, your brand needs to come to mind. And that's certainly a System 1 mechanism. So is your community...
So that's the Ehrenberg Bass stuff, which says that, the important thing for brands is all about awareness and salience.
Mental availability, absolutely. So it lends beautifully into absolute Ehrenberg Bass, the EBR theory. It also lends beautifully into the behavioral economics stuff, where that also says that we're making really quick decisions, and our brain, you've got a network. Brands have a network in your brain, and if that network is strong enough, and you come to mind quickly enough when the consumer comes into market for your category, or your brand, your product range, that brand comes to mind. So you have to work with that really quick brain.
If I may just jump in, I'm sorry, Paul, to interrupt, but one of the things is, like, give me an example if I had to go into store and I need to make a decision on a toothpaste that I would like to buy. What is the process there? What is the instinct, and how does that whole decision-making process work there?
Okay, so let's give you a marketing 101 as quickly as I can. If you're in the market, you will have a repertoire of brands that you are comfortable with. So mental availability, which Paul and I have touched on, is one thing. Physical availability is the other thing. So on that shelf needs to be brands that you're familiar with, that are physically available for you. And you will make a snap decision based on the repertoire of brands that you are comfortable with. Most consumers do not only buy one brand over a lifetime or over a year. They will probably be comfortable to buy 2 or 3 brands. You may buy one more than the other, but certainly give me 3 brands of toothpaste that you would be comfortable to purchase.
Aquafresh, Oral-B, and Colgate.
Okay, perfect. So there goes your repertoire. You've got a repertoire. It's normally quite stable. If I tell you now, picture yourself in front of the shelf, which toothpaste are you going to pick up?
Oral-B.
And you probably did that in under 13 seconds, because that's how long we normally stand in front of shelves. You don't deliberate.
Is that the same for every product in a supermarket?
Certainly, yes. In the FMCG space and across most categories, absolutely. They say there's up to 13 seconds that a consumer will consider a brand choice.
And
wow. What about when you get to bigger ticket purchase items, like buying a car? Is that the same?
It's certainly similar. It won't be identical, but certainly when you come into the market for a vehicle, which is in a high involvement purchase, you will still consider to look at the cars that come to your mind, or to the cars that are in your repertoire at that stage. Again, that's a System 1. So if I'm in the market for a car and my category entry point is I'm a mom, I need something that's safe, I need something with 4 doors, I may think of 3 car brands that come to mind. That is a System 1 exercise, those 3 brands. You will then go in and explore and unpack and search what the car's costs are, what the benefits are. But certainly those brands that you will consider once you come into the market, that is a System 1 and a quick decision in terms of what you'll look at from
That's interesting.
So you mentioned at the start there, Kirsty, another word I just wrote down on my notes here. You mentioned that we're influenced by bias. Can you explain a bit more about that? Maybe give us a couple of examples of the kind of bias that changes our behavior.
Okay, there are many, many cognitive biases, and for the sake of the show, maybe I'll just touch on 1 or 2. Just in terms of your biases and your heuristics, we use the word irrational in terms of how consumers behave. And irrational by no means that we're stupid or we're dumb. In fact, it means that we're incredibly smart and we're wired for efficiency. But one of those biases is that, for instance, there's a lot of research if you give consumers too much choice, or it's called the choice overload bias, that they actually get paralyzed and they don't make a decision at all. So there's a very famous case study where they sell jams in the UK at one of the retailers, and the one table's got a variety of 6 jams on it, and the second table's got a variety of 24 jams on it. And what happened is that 60% more people stopped at the table with 24 jams, but only 6% purchased. On the alternative, where they only had a variety of 6 jams, I think there was a 30% uptake in people that actually made a decision and purchased the jams. And that's where the bias comes in. When you give too much choice to consumers, they actually don't make any choice at all. And there are lots of examples. I've given you a very basic example to unpack that example. The other one is there is obviously for consumers or for humans, I keep saying consumers, but we're all wired the same and we're all consumers, but is that it's very important to understand that as humans, feeling a loss is much greater than feeling a gain.
I knew it. Because every time when I buy a pair of shoes and I see that it's out of stock, I want that pair of shoes more desperately than ever before. So yes, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and that taps that loss go. There are lots of things. It goes into the loss. You will see these tactics, especially online, the scarcity bias, where if you think there's not a lot of something, or it's a limited edition, or only for 5 days, or only by invite, that all taps into a bias called the scarcity bias, because all of a sudden, if there's not a lot or it's it's exclusive, we immediately give it more value than it's worth. And that's sort of an example of one of the cognitive biases that marketers can tap into
If
responsibly.
I must say, this is something now that really leads me into the whole thinking behind, this whole buy one, get one free, and the rewards and the incentives and the rewards, and every brand that's out there is doing this element of giving out rewards. How does the consumer or individual in their mind take all of this in? Does it have an impact on the purchasing behavior, or do you think that too much choice, as you mentioned before, it really doesn't have that much impact because everybody's doing it?
So I think it certainly can tweak the way you frame or the context you put your advertising or marketing or your message in. Certainly, if you use the biases constructively, will have an impact on behavior. And I think people are applying this very aggressively in the online space at the moment. So if you create scarcity only for 3 days, or if you do another bias is ownership. So if you let somebody take ownership of something, so buy now and then pay later, you feel a sense of ownership for it. And when then you are asked to pay for it at a later stage, you are more willing to pay for it because you have a sense of ownership. So does it impact consumer behavior? Yes. Can marketers tweak their messaging to encourage the behavior they're after? Absolutely. Are consumers conscious of these biases? For the most part, absolutely not. So it happens at an unconscious level. So when you are booking an aeroplane ticket and it says 1 seat left, and you were going to consider the aeroplane ticket overnight, and all of a sudden you're purchasing it because it said 1 ticket left, you've succumbed to a cognitive bias, but you don't succumb to it at a conscious level.
Okay.
So we don't even know we're being manipulated.
No, we don't know we're being manipulated. There's a lot of work where people are. There's a lot of behavioral economists trying to educate people in terms of being aware, but even they are succumbing to it because it's just the way we're wired.
That's so interesting.
Kirsty, let me ask you a quick question. Do you think it's possible for us to behave differently at work than we do in our private lives, or are we subject to exactly the same sets of biases? Because I know a lot of people think, when I get to work, I'm a different person. Is that really true? Can we do that?
No, I don't think it's really true. And that's going to go into a whole different area in terms of how the role of emotion in decision making. And certainly if the show was 3.5 hours long, we could get into it. But there's a lot of theory to say, if I can unpack it as quickly as I can, to say that your decisions, whether at work or at home or in the consumer space when you're buying something, is motivated by a large portion by your emotional brain, because your system 1 is emotional. And it's very difficult actually to make decisions without emotions. So that goes completely against the assumption that certainly people in high management or your accountants are highly logical. They take emotion out of all decisions. Things are thought through, and then when they get home, they may be a little bit more emotional. The latest theory, certainly from neuroscience and from behavioral economics, is that emotion, whether you're aware of it or you like it or not, does play a role in how you make decisions. whether it be what you're buying, whether it's a work decision. The trick is to use those emotions constructively to help you make good decisions.
So my system one is telling me that I have to go to an ad break. So we have to quickly go for an ad break. Catch you just now on the flip side.
You're listening to brandlive.co.za, an industry first in the world of internet radio. Not only are we an internet radio station, we're an internet radio platform for your brand. So why not expose your brand to potentially thousands of listeners and improve your customer relationships and brand equity with podcasts and live broadcasts? Be sure to check brandlive.co.za for more information. brandlive.co.za, harnessing the power of internet radio. Making a bold statement yet blending into the surrounding suburbs of Melville, 27 Boxes is a realization of edgy design and practical implementation. A radical departure from the shopping malls of our generation, yet not a return to the high streets of our youth. 27 Boxes showcases the best of a shopping centre set in a garden, surrounded by the bohemian suburb that is Melville. 27 Boxes, shop, play, eat. Harnessing the power of talk radio. brandlive.co.za. You're listening to brandlive.co.za.
Good morning, everyone. You are tuned in with the WITEE Chatterbots show, and we're having such an amazing conversation with our co-host Paul Berney and with Kirsty Dugmore, who is our guest today. And we're unpacking behavioral economics. Now, we were just talking about some of the decision-making processes, and I wanted to put something forward here. I was actually listening into Malcolm Gladwell the other day. And he was talking about a very interesting topic, and I think this could lead us into the next set of questions. But apparently, there's a very big research happening, especially in the States, around ketchup. So ketchup is something that they've never had to reproduce their product into multiple other products like island sauce or line extensions, and yet they're one of the most popular brands, always the top choice to make. And yet there's other brands that have thousands of line extensions, and like your vinegars and your mustards and your salts, and it can go in a million ways. And everybody's trying to understand, how do they make their brand like a ketchup, like that you don't need to extend your brand into anything. It's just that lovable brand that everybody always wants. And this, I think, was also very interesting with what you were talking about, that study with the 6 jams and the 24 jams, is that, the more choice you give people, the less they're going to make a decision. So maybe you can lead us into Paul with some questions that you have around that.
Yeah, so I what I'm hearing from you here really is that people make decisions in an irrational way, that marketers have got to rely on more scientific evidence and real world observation of individuals. We've got to take into account bias and what have you. Can you give me kind of 3 clear steps that marketers should take if they're going to take on board the lessons from behavioral economics? I know it's kind of cruel to kind of ask you to boil it down to 3 things, but if people are listening in today, what should they be doing from today onwards that's different?
Okay, I'm going to try give you 3 clear sort of applications. Certainly from a brand perspective, I think the big switch for marketers is to be easily thought of. Instead of expecting consumers to think about your brand, be a brand that is easily thought of when they come into mind. You also have to be physically available. So mental availability is obviously huge, that you do come to mind when they're in the buying situation. And that's Ehrenberg Bass Institute. That's not behavioral economics. And your physical availability. So you need to come to mind when they're in the buying situation. You need to be available when they're in the buying situation. And from a branding point of view, and in our networks and our neural networks and how we think in System 1, and if you think of all of those things, you need to make sure as a brand that you're incredibly distinctive and consistent in everything that you do. As consumers, we don't have time to deliberate, make comparisons, think about things. You need to be, and I always use Coke. It's an incredibly strong brand, but you know immediately if you're thirsty, if you're in a store, you will reach for a Coke. It's distinctive, it's consistent in everything it does, and the consumers are very clear in terms of what that brand is in their mind. So it's very easy to buy a Coke when you're in the market or when you have a thirst, because that's what the communication has done for that brand for many, many years. They've been very clear, they've been very distinctive. Does that make sense? So it's distinctive,
it does.
consistent, mental and physical availability, and to be easy to think of.
Now, if I'm allowed, I'd like to challenge you a little bit, because
Sure.
the problem I've always had with the Ehrenberg Bass stuff is it focuses almost entirely, or at least Byron Sharp's book focuses almost entirely on mass marketing and doesn't see much value in targeted, highly personalized marketing. How do you square that away then? That away with, because so many more marketers, ourselves included, are pushing brands to use targeting better, to use more personalized messages and create more personalized products.
So certainly, I think there is room for personalized marketing. The engagement levels are obviously higher, and you'll see the conversion levels, certainly from a mobile perspective, that you can monitor so closely. The data is incredible. I think you need both. I think as a marketer, you need absolutely both. You need to reach as much of your category as you can, which is a lot of the Byron Sharp theory, so that when people do come into the market for your product, which can be at any time, it's completely random, that your brand does come to mind. Having said that, having targeted personal communication on a mobile phone, as long as that is adding incremental reach to your target market, and as long as you're reaching the correct target market, and as many of them as possible in your highly targeted, personalized communication. So if you are doing a mobile campaign and you want to reach mums who are going to have babies, and being completely generalized, in the next 6 months, because you sell a baby care range, is your campaign using the platform to reach as many of those mums as possible, so that when they come into the market, they think of your brand? So yes, absolutely, mums you can target them at the right time. You can send them messages: dear mom, we know you're now 7 months pregnant, you will need the following products. Powerful marketing tools. So absolutely, the space is there, but don't forget that you do need to be reaching as many of that market as possible. So don't try reach for 10 of those mums. Do try reach for as many as the platform will allow you. Mobile certainly is a mass platform, so you need to just be smart the way you do target it. Make sense, Paul?
Okay, that's...
Yeah.
Okay, are you happy with the answer?
Well, I think we could get you back on and talk about it again to debate it. I guess a lot of people who are listening in will have connected with that Byron Sharp thinking and what have you. But a lot of us are used to targeting around either big demographics or either on a personalization level. And I know in South Africa it's quite a big deal to target people around LSM groups.
No, absolutely. And you also, the targeting, it also enables you to target people quite far down the purchasing tunnel, the consumer journey tunnel, when you, obviously from a search perspective, et cetera. So those are very useful marketing tools. And I think they can be used in conjunction with your broader, bigger media marketing platforms.
I'm going to ask a question. So on LSM markets or LSM targeting, what is your views on that? Do you think that it's effective?
So I think it's necessary because we don't have any other tools in the industry in terms of an industry norm for segmenting markets. And certainly in a country that is as diverse as South Africa. I mean, our lower LSMs, there are hundreds and thousands of millions of them are very low income consumers. So yes, I think it serves a purpose. In terms of tightly defining consumer markets, down to psychographics in terms of how they behave. So if you are going to advertise a coffee, for instance, and you want to be an LSM 9, you're 34, you've got 2 children, you gym once a week. Once you start defining a target market like that, you leave a lot of your potential market on the outskirts, and you leave them available to your competitors, which makes you vulnerable. So if you're a coffee, you need to talk to people that drink coffee in your price range. And so an LSM does give you a guideline, but certainly be careful or be wary as a marketer to define too tightly, especially if you're a mass market product.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement with that. But I also, from my perspective, is like what I've also seen is with LSM targeting, like you would say, okay, right, a person, LSM 7 needs has a car, and they have all of these various elements. But if you look, for example, how many people are now switching over to Ubering to work and back, they're selling their cars because they don't have to worry about petrol, they don't have to worry about transportation and car breaking down. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if you targeting LSM 7, that changes the whole dynamic. If you have environmental views on a microwave, there's a lot of factors that's influencing LSM. But in terms of my last question before we go to the 1 minute game,
can I just touch on Uber if you don't mind?
Yeah. Go.
Just touching on Uber, they disrupted the market. Obviously, they're an incredible case study, but they did exactly that. Uber is for somebody that needs to get to A to B. That's them. That's their market strategy. If you need to get from A to B, whether it's to work, whether you're going to have a couple of glasses of wine, I'm pointing no fingers. But for whatever reason, if you need to be from A to B, Uber is that solution, and that is what they communicate to consumers. They're not a certain LSM bracket, only people that previously used taxis, not only people that don't have cars. They came on as a solution, and that's what they communicate, and they're incredibly effective in that space.
100%. And it's all about behavior. And this is what behavior economics is all about. Is like when you target, you should be targeting according to the behavior, not according to what people own and so forth. But I'm going to ask you a quick question.
I'm going to try to answer it quickly.
Okay. So if you had to give our audience, our listeners, a few good books to read to learn more, what are those books?
Oh, there's lots of delicious books, but certainly there's Decoded by Paul Berney. Which is a really, really good book. And he does a lot of, he uses behavioral economics and neuroscience. So he integrates those two beautifully into from advertising to packaging to how you communicate. So that's really great. Dan Ariely, Predictably Irrational, is the word. Predictably Irrational is his book, and I think that's really good. And certainly I'm sure Paul will agree with me or agree to disagree with me. The How Brands Grow book by Byron Sharp is certainly a good book and a must-read by any marketers.
100% agree. Every marketer should read as much as they can around many different perspectives and approaches.
Totally agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's many, many more, but let's keep it at 3, 4.
Yeah, no.
We don't want to choice overload.
Yes, we want to stick to the system one. Okay. All right. We are going to play our 1 minute game, which is a tradition at the WITEE Chatterbots. So you have 60 seconds to answer 10 questions. We're going to see how quickly you can get through them. On your marks.
Should I be scared?
On your marks. But this is so that people can get to learn to know you better. And this is what we want from our audience, because you're going to be back next week and we are going to have more conversations and more quizzes. Okay.
This is putting my system 1 to the maximum test. So Carmen, go.
Okay. On your marks, get set, go. What would you name your boat if you had one?
Butterfly Fairy. I've got 2 daughters.
What is the most difficult decision you ever had to make?
The most, whether to start my own business or not.
What is the best and worst purchase you've ever made?
Best purchase, a really good a pair of shoes that I never tried on. Worst purchase, a really bad pair of shoes that I never tried on.
Shoes. What is your biggest screw up in the kitchen?
Oh, I have many. I'm really good at screwing up in the kitchen. But certainly I've tried to bake a cake before. It didn't end well.
Okay, what's something your brain tries to make you do and you have the will yourself not to do it?
My brain wants to work really quickly. You can hear by the way I talk. So it wants to just go at 180 kilometers an hour.
How would the world change if superheroes and supervillains actually existed?
How would the world change? I'm hoping there would be more superheroes than supervillains.
Woo! We finished. How many questions? We finished 6 out of 10. Well
better luck
done.
Next time.
Well done. Well,
you do better than me.
Oh, did I, Paul? Okay.
Okay, so Paul, from my side, I just want to ask you to stay online, but I just wanted to thank you very much for being part of the show today. I think you've added a lot of value to the WITEE Chatterbots today, so thank you very much.
My pleasure. Hopefully next time we can have your weather and you can have ours. You'd like a bit of rain.
My system one is saying,
Okay.
Okay, so Kirst, thank you very much for today. I think you were remarkable, and we are looking forward to have you next week, where we're actually going to unpack the customer journey and have you challenge us and vice versa. And we're going to see how that impacts on the decision-making process. So from us here at the studio, WITEE Chatterbots, thank you very much for joining in. This was very exciting, and see you next week.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you, Carmen. See you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Brandlive.co.za